This is Connected, sharing our stories and bringing colleagues together across NSS.
Hello listeners and welcome to Connected, your podcast from NHS National Services Scotland, showcasing the work of our colleagues and all of our partners across Scotland's NHS. We've got another packed show for you today, and my co-hosts Lisa Walker and Karen White are here to tell us what we've got in store for you. Karen, what's coming up?
Well, later in the show, we have a bit about our Scottish Veterans Network, which was recently launched. And to finish off the show, we have a really relaxing mindfulness session for you to join in on.
Also coming up today is part 2 of the SCOTCAP interview with Brendan Faulds, and also a shout out to our Excellence Awards.
Fantastic, Lisa, and I know we'll also be able to round up some of the other latest news from around our organisation. Sounds great, a lot to look forward to, so let's get started.
Next up, we have a roundup of all of the latest updates from NSS.
On the 19th of November, NSS launched the Scottish Veterans Care Network to bring together all of the organisations providing support for Scotland's former servicemen and women. By bringing together the best of their combined efforts, Scotland is going to support our 220,000 strong veteran community in new and improved ways. Dr. Lucy Abraham, the clinical lead for the network, spoke to NSS Connected to explain what the new Scottish Veterans Care Network will achieve for our veteran community.
No one organisation can support and meet all the needs of veterans on their own. Most veterans transition very well from their military life, but for those that struggle with that transition or the circumstances they've been through, their needs can be wide-ranging. And so we need to work together as a network to meet those needs, joining forces to support our veterans.
Next up on your news roundup, Karen, I think you've got something to say about how colleagues all across NSS will soon be celebrating their achievements this year.
Each year, NSS wants to celebrate all of the hard work everyone has been doing. Unfortunately, due to COVID this year, things are going to be a little bit different. So we're going to have our first ever big virtual event to celebrate everyone's hard work, not just the outstanding work, but the business in general, keeping everything going. So on the 8th of December, we are asking all of our staff to tune in and celebrate everything NSS. And we're so excited to see you there. If you're not NSS staff, don't worry, you can tune into our YouTube channel the next day, which will have some of the great highlights.
The excellence of the services being delivered by NHS National Services Scotland is also recognised outside of our organisation. Dave Taggart from National Procurement has been nominated in the Unsung Hero category for the Scottish Health Awards next week. He's one of 3 finalists, and obviously we're hoping that he can bring home a well-deserved prize. Amy Brewer caught up with Dave recently, and here he is.
Dave, congratulations on your nomination in the Scottish Health Awards, which recognises you as an unsung hero for your incredible efforts procuring equipment to support COVID-19 testing. How did you feel when you learned that you were a finalist?
I really felt humbled and sort of honoured. It's really nice to get that recognition from a team of people that you've been working with. I don't take the credit for it because it is a fully team thing and everyone's been involved. And I think it should also be seen as recognition for some of the other work and the procurement people that have been doing it as well. I mean, I would call out especially Ian Main and Kenny Rees, who both been doing efforts within the PPE and also within the intensive care and ventilator side. So it's nice to get, and it's really humbling is what I would say about it.
Well deserved. And if you were to win next week, I think it is, how would you celebrate?
Well, it's funny. How am I going to celebrate? I think I would celebrate at home with my wife, and maybe my son might even come and watch it. He called it a pity award at one point. My sister-in-law deals with sexual health in Tayside. Have a bit of a Zoom call and watch the awards together, and maybe have a glass of wine or two.
Quite right. Very well deserved. Well, best of luck for it.
Thank you very much.
And finally, in your news roundup, last but definitely not least, NHS National Services Scotland has this week appointed its new Chief Executive. Congratulations to Mary Morgan, who will succeed our current Chief Exec, Colin Sinclair, when she takes up her post on the 1st of April. And we hope that we could possibly get some words from Mary herself for the Christmas edition of Your Connected podcast. In the first part of our SCOTCAP special feature last month, Professor Angus Watson, clinical lead for the Scottish Capsule Programme, explained how the remarkable technology will benefit our NHS and thousands of patients. The SCOTCAP camera itself is impressive, but the story of how it became a viable, scalable and sustainable diagnostic tool is arguably even more so. Now, Brendan Faulds, Programme Director for Innovation within NSS, reveals the inside story. How a connected NSS effort saw clinical leadership, programme management teams, finance colleagues and others combine to enable a remarkable rollout that has been accelerated as part of COVID remobilisation. Supported by National Procurement, SCOTCAP is a product of our Procurement Innovation Partnership, the very first in the UK. And the programme has already attracted national and international attention. Hannah Chalmers caught up with Brendan to find out more about SCOTCAP, to learn about its sister innovation Cytosponge, and discover how NSS is at the centre of a more integrated approach to innovation within our NHS.
This morning I'm speaking to Brendan Faulds, who is the Programme Director for Innovation at NSS. Hi Brendan, thanks very much for joining us.
Hi Hannah, pleasure to be here and thanks for inviting me along.
Could you firstly explain a bit about the capsule and the SCOTCAP programme itself for our colleagues who may not be familiar with it?
Yeah, sure. The capsule is a colon capsule and it forms part of a procedure called colon capsule endoscopy. Or CCE, I will just use its short name. In lay terms, it's a camera in a capsule that takes pictures of your insides and then uploads. We then upload the images from the camera to a recording belt that's worn by the patient. So we're particularly interested in the pictures that are taken in the lower gastrointestinal tract, and those pictures are then read and analysed, and a report is produced, which goes back to a diagnostic report, which goes back to the consultant. So that's the kind of end-to-end service. So it's been, as a programme, it's been around for a couple of years. We've been involved from an NSS point of view from the start of that. In fact, I had a previous involvement in it in a previous role when I was still on secondment to the Digital Health and Care Institute, where we funded the initial early study, which was a much smaller study looking at the concept in the first place. So HiCap was the original project, the small study, and when the results of that were published, it was picked up by the Modern Patient Pathway Programme as something that had potential to be rolled out across Scotland. And NSS were asked to provide project governance and financial governance over the project, working with academia, industry and the Innovation Centre, the DHI, that was still involved. So that's been running for 2 years now. And we're now at a point where we are now rolling that out across the country.
What have been the major developments or milestones within the programme over the past 2 years?
The project kicked off in 2018. It was funded by Scottish Government and Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and the first main phase of that was an evaluation phase, which involved 445 patients, which was much bigger than the original HiCap project. The patient cohorts consisted of both initially surveillance and symptomatic patients, but we found that the results from symptomatic patients were far more favourable. The key thing with CCE is that it's a diagnostic tool only, unlike optical colonoscopy, which can both diagnose and intervene in a therapeutic sense. So our key patient demographic are the ones where we don't find any pathology. So we're trying to filter patients where we think it's just a diagnostic exercise rather than any therapeutic exercise. And we found we had better results with symptomatic patients. So that process, setting that up, took quite a long time, and also the procurement of that, supported by our national procurement colleagues, was a first of its kind in the UK. It was called an innovation partnership procurement process. So whilst we've had that legislation and the ability to do that for a number of years, we had no public sector organisation, and certainly no health organisation in the UK had actually used that in earnest thus far. So we were the first to use that, and that meant we could procure the innovation and the evaluation and the development of the service, as well as roll it out should we choose to go ahead in a single procurement process. So that was the first of its kind, and that's been running for 2 years. So that took quite a little bit to set up, and then we went into the evaluation phase, which concluded initially the first part of that concluded in December 2019, and we extended it for a short number of months after that to March, just before lockdown, and when lockdown happened, the study stopped at that point. During the latter stages of that, we were building a business case for the widespread adoption of CCE across Scotland, and trying to convince key clinical stakeholders and Scottish Government stakeholders of the merits of the results of the evaluation, which were very positive. We had some fantastic results out of the evaluation in terms of patient preference. There was a strong leaning from patients towards using CCE rather than optical colonoscopy, and most patients who experience CCE and had experience of optical colonoscopy prefer CCE. It's less invasive, it allows them to stay much closer to home, and it means they don't have to travel into a hospital setting to actually have the procedure.
So have there been any particular challenges to getting the programme to such a crucial stage?
The programme has been a real roller coaster. We frequently describe it as building the airplane as we've been flying it. And that's both in terms of the actual innovation and the technology itself. The key to this was not the technology itself, which is very clever, but we've used the technology, the camera, in the NHS for the last 5 or 6 years. What we've been unable to do is offer it as a sustainable service to patients. So the key difference in terms of what we were looking at through the evaluation phase was how this could be provided as a managed service, working with industry partners, integrating their service into the NHS and working closely with consultants and patients to achieve that. So that in itself was novel, and it was different. And the other aspect to that would be the procurement process, which was a new way of procuring innovation. The procurement process was an innovation partnership procurement model, which, whilst we've had the legislation to cover that for a number of years, we hadn't enacted it, and we were the first in the UK to actually use this to not only procure the innovation, but allow us to scale up the innovation, presuming the evaluation was successful. Those two areas were probably the main challenge areas. People learning how to operate, being very open and transparent, which is again, it's not sort of normal behaviours. There was a different attitude to risk throughout the project as well. So lots of challenges, lots of people involved, lots of organisations involved, and new processes and new ways of working to consider. So in every possible sense, it was new, and new always brings challenge.
So the programme itself has accelerated quite rapidly in the past 2 years. Is there anything you would say that brought about the acceleration of the programme, or was this always the plan to get it to this stage?
We always had a plan to scale this up. That was, to quote Franklin Covey, one of the 7 habits of Covey's 7 habits, we began with the end in mind. And the end was always widespread adoption of this technology, presuming that it evaluated well. So we always had a time plan, which was quite ambitious in the context of other work, but it does take time to evaluate these things. And some of it seemed quite slow when you're in the middle of an evaluation period that's lasting 6 months. Some of that seemed quite slow, but actually what was happening was, some substantial change and exploration in there. So it really did accelerate after the evaluation was complete, or the early stages of the evaluation was complete in December. And NHS Highland wanted to continue the service, so we extended the evaluation to accommodate that. The real acceleration took place when we hit lockdown on the back of the COVID-19 pandemic. Professor Angus Watson, who was our NHS clinical lead for the project, very quickly identified that and on the back of all outpatient endoscopy procedures being cancelled as part of the pandemic measures, because they were aerosol generating procedures, Professor Watson quickly identified that colon capsule endoscopy was a non-aerosol generating procedure, and therefore could be very valuable to the NHS to help support remobilisation of services. So we started conversations at that point with Scottish Government and the wider clinical community. And that included a webinar in June that we conducted, which involved over 150 different individuals, health board executives, senior clinicians, service managers, and patients, and academics, and people from across, not just Scotland, but across the UK and beyond. Sounding them out about the potential and the appetite for this as a service. And it was overwhelmingly positive. And on the back of that, we agreed a funding plan with Scottish Government to roll out and implement CCE in response as part of the remobilisation work and recovery work for the NHS. So we very quickly moved from a position where we were building a business case to try and convince people that this was a good idea, to being in a situation where we had identified demand of over 8,000 procedures between now and March 2021 across the NHS in Scotland from every single health board. And that's when the rapid acceleration really took off, and we moved very quickly into planning mode with health boards. We'd already done quite a lot of preparatory work around implementation and adoption in advance, because we had to work out what the cost of implementation would be as part of the business case. So some of the preparatory work had been done, but we are now in the throes of our Wave 1 implementation, working with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and NHS Tayside, and they are really stress testing our implementation plans and really filling them out in a way that's going to make the future waves much quicker and slicker. So the pace has really picked up probably since May, June time this year.
What do you see happening with the programme in the next 2 years? Do you think it will be rolled out to all the NHS Scotland boards by then, and maybe you'll be working on something else at that point?
Our plan is to roll it out to every board. In terms of other work, on the back of our involvement and our success with SCOTCAP, we have already been asked to support another 3 similar projects to roll out with the support of Scottish Government. So that's been a great great credit to the team that's been involved in it. So whilst one example would be a second endoscopy product called Cytosponge. So whilst SCOTCAP focuses on the lower GI intestinal tract, the Cytosponge is an upper GI endoscopy tool. And basically that's another capsule, but it's a capsule which is on a thread, and you swallow that capsule, the patient swallows the capsule, and when it hits the top of the stomach, the outer part of the capsule dissolves and a sponge is in the middle of that. That's then withdrawn with the thread, and it takes samples on the way back up through the esophagus. And at that point, the sponge is then sent away for analysis, and it's an early detector. It's used to detect early signs of esophageal cancer. So that's now being run out in parallel to SCOTCAP. And I think the relationships we've built with government, academic, innovation centre and industry colleagues puts us in a very good position to deliver many more of these types of projects over the coming years.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up?
Well, I'd just like to add that this wouldn't be possible without a whole range of people across NSS. And again, I'll mention National Procurement, who have been pivotal to this piece of work, particularly embracing these new ways of procuring innovation. Our PGMS colleagues have been instrumental and are very responsive in terms of putting deployment teams in place. Our finance teams have supported this. The clinical directorate, my own directorate, has been very supportive, and Lorna Ramsey is working with senior colleagues across the NHS, and Scottish Government to determine whether there are big learnings from this, and we believe there are, in terms of how we actually orchestrate innovation across NHS Scotland in the future. So that's active work that's underway and worth talking about. We are working quite hard within NSS to start to really join up our approach to innovation. We've established an innovation network which has got representation from most, if not all, SBUs and directorates. And I would encourage anyone who's got an interest in innovation to make contact and find out a little bit more about what's happening in innovation in their area and in the organisation as a whole.
Next up, we're speaking to Fiona Shields, who is a Donor Recruitment and Publicity Officer at SMBCS. She's also a mental health first aider at NSS and talks to us about looking after yourself both physically and mentally. Thanks so much for joining us, Fiona.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
So for people listening who work in other areas of NSS, or in fact in the wider NHS in Scotland, could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, as part of the donor marketing engagement team, a big part of our job is to make sure that the blood donation sessions are well attended and well attended by the appropriate blood group mix as well, and making sure that all of our donors are really fully informed, especially with things changing so dramatically at the moment. And as part of that, I'm part of the digital team. So that means managing the website and the social media and sort of utilising that way of contacting donors as well.
So obviously in this context, we're in the midst of a pandemic. Has your job changed? I know quite a lot of your job is face-to-face with people and meeting people at blood donor sessions. Is there anything that's different about your job right now?
Yeah, there's a few things that have changed quite dramatically. Much like many people, we've had to adapt to working from home. But a big part of that has been, as you say, we were out so much connecting with people face-to-face, and a big part of that was our School Talks programme. So we spent a lot of our time travelling around the secondary schools and speaking to senior pupils about their first opportunity to donate. And it's a really, really vital time to talk to young people. And so that's been a massive thing we've had to change. We've had to find ways to do that virtually and still keep that contact with schools. Another big, we've been working on the project with convalescent plasma. So we've been recruiting people who have recovered from COVID-19 for more than 28 days, and seeing if they can actually come along, donate plasma and help people that are still battling the virus. So that's been a complete change in work pattern and finding new processes and new ways to communicate with people.
And speaking of communicating with people, giving blood, we've heard from Jason Leach and we've seen on the SNBTS social media that it's an essential journey. Do you find that you're still getting plenty of donors turning up to give blood at the right time?
Yeah, so the response initially was absolutely overwhelming. People really looking for something that they could do to help, I think. We have seen that come up and down over the course of this year. It's the patterns have moved in different ways from what they've done before, but there is still a real want for people to help. But we do definitely still need a lot of brand new donors and returning donors to help us this year as well.
So this episode of the podcast is focused on mental health and wellbeing, and I think the pandemic has really affected a lot of us, if not most of us, in some capacity on our own mental health, whether it's people feeling isolated or maybe overworked or a little bit more stressed than usual, just in the current context. One of the things that you've mentioned before is that you are a mental health first aider at NSS. Could you tell us a little bit more about what it is that a mental health first aider does?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to go along to the NSS mental health first aid training last year. I've been interested in from quite a young age, just to see how we can look after ourselves and to help that help us look after other people as well. And I think that the course was really, really interesting in taking a point of view of how we can look after our mental well-being, but actually within our workplaces, where sometimes our habits, for the want to be doing the best we can with our job, sometimes that comes a way that we don't actually always look after ourselves. So I think it's really, really important just to encourage people to look after themselves, particularly right now where we are working isolated, quite a majority of us, or those that are working within the public are also finding those extra stresses as well. So having people that you can actually talk to within your team that may not necessarily be your line manager, I think that it's a really good thing to encourage within our teams.
And do you have like a single piece of advice for someone listening who wants to make sure they're looking after their own mental health?
Oh wow, one piece of advice is quite tricky, but certainly I think I would encourage anyone to sort of remember the analogy of when you're on an aeroplane. It's the oxygen mask thing. It's about looking after yourself first before you can look after other people. And I think in our industry, everyone wants to do good and everyone wants to look after other people, but remembering to look after yourself first. So we have so much of our time at the moment is spent in front of screens. Even more so with so many of our meetings becoming through Teams and I think just actually remembering to take time away from a screen, maybe get outside if you can, take a walk around your block at lunchtime, or even just dedicate 5 minutes to just switching off. I think it's a really, really important thing.
Definitely, and it's so important to get outside. Like I've noticed myself working from home that just getting a bit of fresh air absolutely helps. Lockdown has been so challenging. It's still not really certain when restrictions will be lifted. Have you managed okay with the restrictions? How have you been getting on and coping?
Yeah, I think one of the toughest things for me has been I live a sort of 4-hour drive from my parents, so not being able to just jump in the car anytime that you normally are. We just take it so for granted. So I think there's been things that have been really, really difficult in coping with working in new ways. But I think it is taking advantage of those little things like getting outside and the amazing benefits that it has for your health. So for me, I've done a lot of running. I've been practicing a lot of yoga. Took up paddle boarding this year. Anything just to get me outside has definitely been a huge thing for me. But another little trick that I definitely adapted is to try and do something for myself in the mornings before I start work. So some days that could be getting on my yoga mat and doing a quick practice. Some days it could just be sitting with a cup of tea and a book and curling up on the sofa for 20 minutes even, just to know that I've done something that's for me, is a good way just to sort of separate the day.
That is such a good tip. And I think getting out of your bed just a little bit earlier than you need to for work when you're working from home can be quite difficult, especially when it's getting darker in the mornings. But I think that's really, really good advice to do something for yourself first. And like you said, it's like putting on your own sort of oxygen mask first before you even start the day.
Yeah, and I think we used to have that sort of commute time I wasn't doing anymore when working from home. So I've sort of switched up trying to focus on that little bit of time for me.
So you mentioned that you sometimes do a little bit of yoga in the mornings. I know that you recently became a yoga teacher.
Yeah, so I've been practicing yoga for around 10 years. I started practicing yoga because I was having quite a lot of injuries when I was doing things like running. I was sort of doing more and more running and finding I wasn't very good at doing the stretching part before and afterwards, which everyone knows they should do, but it's not always easy to put into practice. So yoga definitely for me was something that I came to for the physical benefits. But the stress relief and the mental benefits that come along with yoga were definitely some of the reasons that I stayed with it. And during lockdown, I actually decided to use that extra time I had to study and become a yoga teacher.
You touched a little bit on the positive impact of sort of mental benefits to practicing yoga. Is there anything that you've seen in your sort of daily practice that's helped you with your mental well-being?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, physically, it's obviously quite obvious the benefits that you're going to get from yoga, but things like your sleep quality can improve really dramatically. For me, I think one of the really big things was connecting with breath, and actually realizing how you can use that to calm yourself down, to relax yourself. And even to get yourself moving when it's a day when you are quite tired and sleepy. There's little tricks you can do to sort of get your body actually kind of ready to go. So I think for me, that's been some of the big things. But I also have a thing called Myers-Irlen syndrome, which is like a visual stress. So it's kind of related to things like dyslexia, in the sense that when I look at a screen or a page, the words can move around a little bit, letters, patterns can form, that kind of thing. So I think having that time away from screens and away from the sort of pressures of daily life can really be beneficial. For me, it might be the visual stress. For someone else, stress could be manifesting in all sorts of different ways. But I think it's a really great way to just sort of take some time for you.
Absolutely. And just now, so you said you became a yoga instructor during lockdown, is that right?
Yeah.
Are you teaching yoga in person now that the restrictions have lifted, or are you doing it all online? How does that work?
So at the moment, with group classes inside being off, online's been a great way to really sort of spend some time getting used to teaching and build up sort of a student sort of profile as well. So I've really been taking advantage of the online classes, and I think it's great for actually a new teacher to sort of find different ways to practice. But also I think it's great for students who are coming to yoga as new students, people who have maybe not had a huge amount of experience in yoga before, because some of the pressures that you might have felt, oh, do I want to go to a class where I don't know anyone, or oh, what do I wear, or even just like the simple things of sort of being able to actually take your practice and focus on yourself is so much easier to do in your own home and surrounded in an environment where you feel really nice and safe. So I've been doing a lot of work with people who are relatively new to yoga, and I think that as much as I'm excited about getting the opportunity to teach people in person, I'm also really enjoying the benefits of teaching online. So I think I'll try to do a little bit of both.
And would you recommend starting an online class first for a beginner, or do you have any tips for someone that's maybe looking to do yoga for the first time?
Yeah, I think one of the things I hear a lot from people when I talk to them about yoga, and people that maybe not experienced it before, is they'll maybe say things like, "Oh, I'm not flexible enough to do yoga," and that's like the biggest myth in the world, because practicing yoga can be all different things. It could be just lying down on your back and doing a little bit of meditation. It could be a movement. It could be wrapping yourself up into a pretzel shape. There's lots of different sort of styles and ways with yoga. So I think it's about finding the right thing for you. And actually, there's loads of free online resources, particularly on the likes of YouTube, and there's lots of different apps now that you can find things. But I definitely think that finding somebody who you can practice with, and that you can get a little bit of feedback from, or that you can even ask those questions when you do an online practice. There might be little things that come up. For me, it was definitely, that doesn't feel right to have my leg there. Is there another movement I can do with that, and being able to talk to a teacher? So I think if you can find people that are teaching online, it is a great way to start out. But I think actually just taking a moment to sort of assess what's going on with your body. I mean, you could have a daily yoga practice literally sitting in front of your laptop and just thinking to yourself, what's going on with my forehead right now? Is it relaxed? Take a little think about your jaw. Do you clench through your jaw whilst you're sitting in your work position? And what about your shoulders as well? That'd probably be the three things, if you could introduce to your daily life, that I've learned from yoga, that I would definitely recommend, is just checking in: forehead, jaw, shoulders, and can you relax them? And I think even that can be a benefit of yoga that you can add into your workday.
Definitely. Just as you said that there, I immediately pulled my shoulders down, felt that I was clenching my jaw, and I think I had my eyebrows raised just while I was listening. So I think sometimes, if you're sitting in front of a desk for so long, you just get into those habits. But that's a really, really good tip, just to be mindful of your posture and to take a minute to fix it.
Yeah, and it can be something as simple as that. It can just be introducing those kind of practices into your day, and then maybe thinking a little bit about the breath and if that can relax you by maybe doing inhales and exhales from the nose and just slowing your breath down. Those little tiny things that you can even do sitting at a desk can have those massive benefits for you.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much. And I'm sure people listening will now also be fixing their posture and hopefully taking some time out of their own day just to take care of themselves as well.
Now, the advent of Microsoft Teams, which has been rolled out throughout the past 6 months within NSS, has transformed how we communicate with our colleagues and how together we better serve the NHS in Scotland. There's plenty to learn, however, about this new facility we have, and Stewart Robison within DAS shares his top tips.
I think what I would ask people to be mindful of in terms of when they're using digital communication is how you want your message to come across. Generally, you're not face-to-face with someone else. 90% of communication is micro-expressions in body language and tone. None of those things come across when you type something. So please, when you're asking a question or making a point, have a think about how you might react to the way that you've written it, when it to be written by someone else and received by you, because it may not be the same way that you intend it to be received. Be careful about your punctuation. Try not to add 2 question marks or 3 exclamation marks to the end of a sentence, because it can come across as aggressive. And you never know what they've got on, where they are, what's happening to them. So be precise, be polite, and be kind.
The Connected podcast is now available on all your favourite podcast platforms.
Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter at NHS NSS so you don't miss any updates. Continuing on with our mindfulness theme, we have Angela from the comms team interviewing Colby Adams, our mindfulness expert.
I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Colby Adams, who many of you may already know from the work she's done across the organisation. Today, we're talking about mindfulness and how that relates to wellbeing. Now, wellbeing is something that we have all been aware of the need for many years, but its importance has taken on a new dimension in recent months as we deal with COVID-19. With that being said, I'd like to invite Colby to introduce herself to you.
Thanks, Angela, and thanks for inviting me to get involved with this today. My role in National Services is as an HR organisational development consultant, which is a mouthful, so we just call it OD for short. And my OD role involves advising on development solutions for supporting people in the organisation, including leaders, and we're here to help find ways to shape our culture, especially during times of change. I specialise in coaching and supervision for leadership development, and outside work, I train and assess coaching qualifications for the Institute of Leadership and Management. But what I'm most excited about is that I'm qualified as a mindfulness instructor, and I work with a range of people across public and private sector organisations.
Thank you. And some people may already have met you at some of the mindfulness taster sessions that you've been providing over the last year or so at NSS.
Yes, I think I know I'm working with Diane at the moment to see how we can build in some virtual mindfulness sessions, taster sessions, to support the Healthy Working Lives health fairs. And I've recently done some work with Scottish Parliament, again online, and that was very rewarding.
It's a really valuable piece of work. So everyone's had to adapt to a new way of working in recent months due to the COVID-19 pandemic. How has the new way of working impacted on you?
Well, I've just celebrated my 23 years anniversary at NSS.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And it has, when someone asked me, well, what's that been like? I said it felt like working for several different organizations. Such has been the rate of change over all these years. And, now more than ever, I feel that we're suddenly moving into another phase of how our organization is going to be. So although in the past I've been based at Giles Square in Edinburgh, and although I've done a lot of events and hot desking across various offices and boards and venues across Scotland, like everybody else, I now find myself working from home. I feel grateful I have that opportunity, and I do have a good space here to work. However, it's a huge change, and I've had to work on my own motivation. And part of that is things like the mindfulness practice, which helps me ground and anchor, how I am on the day. But also I've found it more important to have a strong sense of purpose every day, to feel confident that I'm doing something that's going to be useful for NSS or the service. And I'm aware that as I'm speaking, my American accent has been coming through, and I just wanted to note that I've been settled here in Edinburgh for almost 40 years, since 1980.
It's fair to say that Scotland is your home after that length of time then, Colby?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay. Can I just ask you then, Colby, what the wider term well-being means to you?
Okay, so well-being is something that, a lot of people consider is about good mental and physical health, to build resilience, literally our ability to keep bouncing back. And as I've stated, I also think well-being is about adopting a sense of meaningful higher purpose. But I probably think that keeping connected to other people is one of the most important aspects of well-being. And in order to do that, we need to make sure we are, connecting well into ourselves, and not just living like lollipops in our heads, but connecting to what's happening in our environment, what's happening within our bodies. And mindfulness is a really good way to ensure that we're feeling grounded.
And why do you think that's important, particularly given the current circumstances that we find ourselves in?
Well, I think, there is a risk with all these very understandable safeguards in place to protect ourselves and each other from the virus. There is that danger of isolation and disconnect and drift without a kind of North Star to anchor and guide us. So where we are used to rubbing alongside other people and kind of keeping on track with those interactions, I think we need to ensure we spend time for ourselves in these very isolated circumstances, where even if we're working in an office, there aren't very many of us around, or if we're working in a lab, or if we're working out with the public, we need to ensure we're making, good space for ourselves to ensure that we can re-energize and restore, and to ensure we can, just as I keep saying, anchor ourselves within ourselves in order that we can bounce back.
And how does mindfulness fit in to that whole picture? I'm conscious that some of our listeners may not know what mindfulness is or what you can use it for. So can you maybe take us through that, Colby?
Sure, that's a good question. And mindfulness practice it is what it sounds like. It is a practice, and it encourages us to focus on the moment as a respite from our habits of, ruminating about thoughts from the past, or, getting hooked on anxieties about the future. The practice involves taking a break from that and protecting some time with the intention to be just present in the moment, using a natural support like the breath, the body, or movement, or sound, or even just a daily activity like brushing your teeth. And to really spend that time really noticing what's going on within you and around you, your thoughts and feelings, the sensations, and just allowing these to be present without trying to change them, and ensuring you allow self-compassion and non-judgment. We can't do it 24 hours a day, but we can take time out to do this. And the one thing I would always say to people is mindfulness is not a good practice while you're driving. But what I would also just add is that compassion, as well as mindfulness, is an important part of the discipline. And it is a discipline. It's an enhanced mental training in much the same way as a commitment to, physical training might be if we were getting ready to go for a big run, or, if we were, trying to build our stamina for cycling long distances. So it is a practice that needs practice. And that's one of the important things, that sticking with it will make it work best for people.
I think it's a really good point that you make around the physical training. And I think sometimes we neglect the mental training that we need and the mental side of our well-being. But hopefully things are changing and people are becoming more aware of what needs to be done to keep well. How then did you get involved in mindfulness?
Oh, well, a good friend of mine invited me along, as you do, to an event being run by someone who I now realize was quite an important figure and hopefully still is. Robert Nairn, who wrote The Diamond Mind, was leading a guided session. And I went along having never done anything like this before. But I was so distracted because I was really thirsty and there was nowhere to get a glass of water that I kind of went off the whole thing, because I just felt, well, I'm sitting here and I'm thirsty and all I can experience is that I'm thirsty. So sometimes when you try something for the first time, it isn't what you expect. But my friend involved me a little further and I went to a few more sessions, and then I ended up doing some weekends with the Mindfulness Association UK. And we travelled down to the Kagyu Samiling Tibetan Centre in Eskdale Muir, which is a very beautiful area, not far from Lockerbie. And I really got hooked. And eventually I became qualified as a mindfulness instructor in 2017.
And I think it's important to note, you mentioned that your first experience wasn't the best experience with mindfulness. And I think it is important to note that the first time that you try a mindfulness session, that it might not feel comfortable for you and it might feel a little awkward, but it is something that it's worth coming back to if you need that space. So how do you think that it can help people?
Certainly there is clinical evidence that mindfulness practice can reduce, chronic stress, including hypertension, and it can boost the immune system, as well as support the management of serious conditions such as chronic pain and cancer. And I know for myself, it has transformed my ability to manage my own mental health and some aspects of pain that I have now that I'm kind of old. So it has really made a difference. It doesn't take everything away. It just helps manage it a little bit better. And I know that a lot of clinicians and therapists are including mindfulness and training in mindfulness as part of therapies and part of the healing process for people.
So are there circumstances, Colby, when this wouldn't be right for someone?
Yes, and that's a good question. Mindfulness, as I said, doesn't take away. It won't take away, for example, any difficult or fearful thoughts. It will only help us manage these by encouraging us to consider the moment we are in and accept and remind us that, we are more than our thoughts, that our minds are butterfly minds, and that it is important to sometimes, connect to our bodies and live in an integral way rather than just living in our heads like lollipops, which I know I sometimes get caught up in that. It's just me and the screen, and I forget about everything else that's going on. What they might find is that underlying feelings and physical sensations can arise and can feel slightly uncomfortable. And this is natural. But if someone is new to mindfulness, this may feel a little overwhelming, especially if they're experiencing a time of acute bereavement or mental health crisis, such as clinical depression. And in this case, individuals should always consult with a GP or their counsellor or their therapist. And of course, NSS, has a great occupational health service. And even just talking to your line manager or your friends and colleagues and your family is a good way to ensure that you're looking after your well-being and your good mental health.
I think your description of the butterfly mind is really appropriate, and it's something that I'm sure many people will be familiar with as we sit and look at our screens. And from my point of view, my mind sometimes bounces around different things, and I can't focus on one thing just because it's flitting around all these different ideas. So it's nice to know that there is a mechanism out there just to take that time and focus on one task or one thing. So Colby, just to finish up, really, where can people get more information about mindfulness practice?
Okay, so there is a plethora of information out there in the world and on the screens. Certainly, the Mindfulness Association UK is a very good organisation, has lots of YouTubes and links to guided discussions and information. Here at NSS, there's a lot of work underway to ensure there's a kind of well-being hub, within our organisation. And if you access HR Connect, you'll find links to a variety of things, including a link to information about mindfulness. And the other thing I want to mention is Headspace. For those who haven't heard about Headspace, it is a popular mindfulness app, and there are many of these apps, but Headspace believes mindfulness should encompass every aspect of life, and not just when you're sitting to meditate. And they offer a free membership to all NHS till December 2020, and we'll have to watch the space to see if they may extend that over the winter. But I've heard a lot of good feedback, and I've been into it a few times myself. And it also allows you to think about whether you want to focus on your sleep or on, managing stress or just managing the moment. They offer a lot of different options.
We've given us lots to think about and lots of information about mindfulness today, Colby. Thank you very much for that.
And that wraps up this month's episode of Connected. Thank you so much to all of our guests, and thank you so much to everyone who's interviewed them, and to all our listeners listening to this episode.
And make sure to tune in for our Christmas special.
And as an early Christmas gift, here's Colby to talk us through a fantastic guided breathing exercise to close out the show. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and stay connected.
Let's get started with a breathing space. And bringing your attention to your posture. Feet flat on the ground if you're sitting in a chair. Holding your spine upright with the intention of being awake and aware. Hands sitting relaxed on your lap. And you can have your eyes either open or closed. And silently asking yourself, what is my experience right now? What are my thoughts and my feelings? What are the physical sensations within my body just now? and just sitting and loosening and just taking a moment to register what's going on within you and around you. And softening your posture, allowing your face to rest, allowing your shoulders to drop, noticing any tensions in the hips or the legs, letting these go, and gently guiding your attention to your breath, and taking a couple of slow, deep breaths, breathing in like sniffing a flower, breathing out like blowing a leaf. And just take a moment just to notice the feeling of breathing. Breathing into the body and breathing out of the body. And noticing the contact of your feet on the floor and the contact of your body in the chair and the sensations there. And knowing that you are grounded and supported in this moment. And just focusing on breath. And if you get distracted, that's okay. Just gently bring your attention back to the breath. And do this just for another moment. Breathing in and breathing out. And allowing everything to be as it is. Nowhere to go. Nothing to do in this moment. Feeling the breath in the body. Noticing thoughts and feelings and sensations as they arise and dissolve. And just let them be. Bringing your attention back to the breath. Allowing all the around you. And just coming back to the breath. And when you're ready, imagining a wide and open smile across your chest, across your heart, and breathing into this. And knowing that the breath is always with you as an anchor, something you'll always have with you whenever you need it. Slowly opening your eyes, maybe having a bit of a stretch, wiggling your fingers and toes. And just bringing yourself back when you're ready. And noticing what you've noticed.
Thank you very much for your time today, Colby. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone who's listened has got something out of the session that you've just done. I know that I found it very relaxing. Thanks once again.
That's great. My pleasure, Angela.